So what do we mean by GI? Well, we can say what it's not, and what it's not is gastrointestinal in this setting. Government issue or galvanized iron, also not what we're talking about today. That is down the hall. Not really, but we're talking about green infrastructure, and you all know that. So what is it? We can just start by saying what the EPA defines it as. They define it as a cost-effective, resilient approach to managing wet weather impacts that provides many community benefits. While a single-purpose gray stormwater infrastructure, such as conventional pipe drainage and water treatment systems, is designed to move urban stormwater away from built environment, green infrastructure reduces and treats stormwater and its source while delivering environmental, social, and economic benefits. We can also talk about green infrastructure as low-impact development. So the term low-impact development, LID there, refers to systems and practices that use or mimic natural processes that result in infiltration, evapotranspiration, or the use of stormwater to protect water quality and associated aquatic habitat. And all these things, bioretention cells, bioswales, rain gardens, we'll talk about them all today. And we're lucky to have some great vendors here that kind of provide some of the support for these practices in Iowa. Just on the very high level, federal level for GI, EPA is kind of taking a lead in promoting green infrastructure on a very broad, high level. But it's great to see that departments throughout, such as Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Housing and Urban Development, Department of the Interior, and Department of Transportation, they're all kind of stepping forward for green infrastructure in general. So we're proud to see it here, and then we come today on a very local level, so it's hitting all levels. So today's goal, before we kick it into our first speaker, is just learn about green infrastructure in general, to take it away from today and start making informed decisions as you go back to your communities. So with that, I would like to welcome Aaron Gwinnup. Aaron is a surface water engineer with our lead conference sponsor today, HR Green. He's a self-classified stream nerd. I saw that on his LinkedIn profile, so I'm not making that up. Skills include stormwater infrastructure and BMP design in urban and ag settings, geomorphic stream design, stream and wetland restoration design, modeling, and technical writing. He's been with HR Green for about 7 years now, a fellow Hawkeye, and you wear the Cubs hat all the time, so I'm saying you're a fellow Cubs fan. So welcome, Aaron. Thanks, Aaron.
You bet. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, here we go. So I wanted to keep this kind of high level. There's going to be a lot of great presentations today on all kinds of stormwater issues and BMPs and great things you can do. And so Ben and Pat asked me to just kind of talk on a high level about urban stormwater management challenges and particularly some of the effects on streams that we see, because I do a lot of stormwater BMP work and I do a lot of stream work, and they're intrinsically connected, obviously, but we don't spend a whole lot of time really focusing on that. And so instead of getting into a lot of depth about individual issues and practices, just kind of a high level overview. In general, I'll just kind of talk about motivations and why I do what I do, and a lot of you probably do very similar things. You came to a green infrastructure conference after all. Thank you. Oh yeah, and if in the back you can't hear me at any time, feel free to interrupt and yell at me. I'm an engineer, so I kind of start mumbling at times, fade away, so just let me know. Anyway, the motivations, the problems, why we do what we do, and some of the solutions, and then you know, when I say maybe do it better, we're all here to kind of learn and do things. I'm not standing up here as some expert that knows it all, certainly not. I know quite a bit of people in the crowd, and all y'all know a whole lot more about this than I do. But just some, there again, motivations. Anyway, let me get into it. So, why listen to me? Well, you should think for yourself. But I am a stream nerd. And I grew up playing in streams, and I can't give a presentation without putting pictures of my kids in it. They like to play in streams just like me, and that'll be kind of a recurring theme. A lot of what I do since I had kids is kind of coming back to keeping the world safe for them and leaving a better place, yada, yada. But a lot of what I do kind of changed this spring. I give a lot of these presentations and I talk about bioretention cells and streams and the nerdy elements of that. My kids' elementary school asked me to talk to them on Earth Day and give a presentation to some 3rd and 5th graders, 4 back-to-back 20-minute presentations. And I do things like this all the time. That was utterly terrifying. That was one of the most horrible things I've ever done. And I worked the night shift on the back of a scientific boat in a hurricane, measuring the dead zone. That was not nearly as terrifying as talking to a bunch of 3rd graders. I was told they have about a 30-second attention span, and so you got to be really dynamic and keep them going. That wasn't the problem at all. It was more, like, hey, ask me a question anytime. I'm going to talk about what an engineer does. Like, my brother's fish died. And it was, that said, I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was a lot of fun. It'll still be terrifying, but it was fantastic. Okay, so it changed my view on how to do these presentations. And I don't want to insult anybody here, but a whole lot of this presentation is actually the exact same presentation I gave to the 3rd graders, starting with this one. So the big point was, what does my dad do? I'm a water resources engineer, and this is what happens when I don't do my job. This is what I do my job. This is going to be my whole proposal interview next time. I'm just going to say, you didn't hire me. You hired me. Anyway, so they always wonder, what's an engineer? That's not what I do. I don't drive trains. Sounds fun. I'm not an engineer. This is a little bit more like what I do. And I put this up there, and then of course some kid's like, why is that lady poisoning the water? Like, I don't know. Poor choice of internet copyright issue. Anyway, so big picture, we all know how water works. I was going to put some of my slides up about the hydrology cycle and runoff has changed and all that. I'm sure we'll see more about that, and I'm sure a lot of people get that. But this is how I'm explaining it to kids. Explain to a kid what is runoff and water and why do we do what we do. You get to a point and you say, all right, so they understand the water cycle, rain, runoff. But here's the nasty side, right? Water hits urban surfaces and it carries stuff downstream, and sometimes it's not so clean, and sometimes it's really, really not so clean, right? And this is the point where I say, okay, kids, who wants to go swimming in here? Who wants to drink this? And they're like, yeah. And we do the give a hoot, don't pollute, and keep things clean. And at this point, I have a little, like a Lego streetscape model that my kid helped me build, and we sprinkle some pieces of styrofoam on it and some grape Kool-Aid. Actually, this is a great thing. If you ever present to kids, you can sprinkle grape Kool-Aid and then wash it off with some water and run it through a little cup full of soil and sand and stuff like that. Something about the Kool-Aid powder and the dye gets stuck to the soil, and the water that trickles out the bottom is clear, so you can just show them that the water gets all cleaned up by the bioretention cell. That's all great, and it went over like a charm, and they get all excited about not polluting. That's fantastic. But here's where we veer a little bit away from the presentation that I give to the kids, because we know that at the end of the day, this isn't the end fate. This is not really the end of the pipe. I mean, it's literally the end of the pipe, but not really, because there's the whole rest of the stream, right? This is now going into a surface waterway. It's going to the river. It's going to the ocean. The Gulf and the shrimp, and this is why we do what we do, right? This is why we're here, and this is why we're doing this kind of stuff. And engineers like to think of things in this control volume, right? You draw a box around a certain experiment or a set, and things that go in and out, that might be balanced. But at the end of the day, we like to say there is no away. Well, urban streams a lot of times are kind of that away. That's where a lot of the stuff that runs off of humanity ends up. And so it passes through the system, and it's pretty ugly. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of kind of ugly stream situations. And as depressing as that can be sometimes, I spend a lot of time walking urban streams and and looking at this, and we're trying to figure out how to fix the streams. A lot of times we're seeing all the erosion and the trash and whatnot. As depressing as that can be, it's also motivating, right? It reminds me why I do what I do, and it makes me want to go back to the third grade again and give a presentation about why not to pollute. When I was a kid, they were doing the give a hoot, don't pollute thing. We didn't solve that, right? This is still going on. Individual people make better decisions, and that's great. We just got to keep doing that. That's why we're doing what we're doing, right? So there is kind of an away if you don't ever go there, right? But sometimes we do go there. Apparently Wayne Peterson goes there. My kids go there. I go there. A lot of these urban streams are in residential backyards. Your kids go there. All the kids go there. When, you know, I bet you did when you were a kid. If you had a stream in your backyard, or your neighbor did, after school, you go down there and you play, despite what it might look like. Maybe there was some trash, but you probably didn't think about it a whole lot. But nonetheless, whether you want them to be or not, they're not just an attractive nuisance. It's a de facto playground. Okay, enough said about that. Well, almost enough said about that. So these are the kind of things we see a lot. Some of this is legacy stuff. Some of it's more recent. Obviously, the floaters are relatively recent, maybe accidental. That's a cast iron bathtub right there that probably didn't like accidentally wash away in a storm one day. Somebody tossed it there, right? This, you'll never guess what this is. This is actually the outlet structure from a stormwater wetland that I designed and built. And in theory, it's great, except the Iowa River is really high right now, and so all this trash floating in here. As soon as the Iowa River goes back down, that's going out to the river. And so we built this stormwater wetland to clean up the water quality, and it does, I'm sure it does, but it also is a trash collection point, and a lot of stuff makes it through. And so, as proud as I am to say that I designed this great stormwater wetland and it's making things better, it's also a point where all this stuff goes to, and we gotta, clean it up as best we can. All right, I promise it's not gonna be this depressing the whole time. It gets better. We also see, the flotsam. So this is after a big flood event. Water went up, went back down, deposited a lot of stuff. You get it. Not just water quality, but obviously water quantity. We've got detention standards now, and those are being enforced and enacted in a lot of new construction. Of course, there's a whole lot of old development. And the effects of uncontrolled discharge, I'm sure you all see it here and there, but it can be pretty monumental, really. A lot of people don't really get down in the channels and see what it actually does. It's 50, 60 foot tall banks that slough in every time there's a giant gully washer. It's kind of hard to tell. The scale's a little odd. A lot of engineers like their grouted riprap, questioning about the bioengineering or the soft stream stave techniques and whatnot. So a lot of these engineers want to just grout the riprap and put a bunch of concrete in there. You could park a Volkswagen bus in this hole in grouted riprap that blew out because it is not just a guaranteed fix. Sanitary infrastructure, more sanitary infrastructure, car about to go in. This chunk of bank went from being about, I don't recall, something like 50 feet from the curb here. Now it's 26 feet from the curb. One single storm event blew out that bank. Let's see. Yeah, more of the same, similar. This is about a 6 foot deep head cut, something like that, at the end of a undersized box culvert that blew out the stream for 700 feet down. That was just from one single culvert that was undersized. That wasn't even necessarily an urban development issue. That was just, culvert was a little bit too small. Concentrated the force of the water, blew out the world downstream of it. And yeah, this is a fun one. So we get this a lot, that like, let's put in detention basins and we'll hold back some of the water and we'll slow down the flow, right? But we get it there as fast as we possibly can with the storm pipes. And so we preach this thing about distributed practices and distributed detention and topsoil and dust management practices all over the whole landscape and the built environment because of this. Guess what this is over here? That's the detention basin. There's a storm pipe outlet over here. The water was trying to get to the detention basin so it could be slowed down and protect things. And in one big event, blew out the trail. There's a house right next to here, almost took out that really nice oak tree. And so this whole just get the water away as fast as possible thing can be a lot more destructive than a lot of people realize. And detention alone, localized here and there once in a while, is not necessarily the fix. The water just needs to be slowed down everywhere. All right. So Ben and Pat asked me to talk about some of the costs of this, because that really, at the end of the day, there's some people that get it. You all came to a green infrastructure conference, so I'm guessing on some level you either get it or you're interested in it. We deal with a whole lot of people day in, day out, in all walks of life. They might be at our clients or at the cities, or honestly, I get it in my own company, even from other folks that don't necessarily drink the same Kool-Aid that I do. So we have to speak to them in their own terms. Costs. What does this actually cost society? And I guess I'll come to that a little bit more in a moment. But the costs are effectively hidden if you don't go there. If you don't see in the stream, or you don't deal with the infrastructure every day, it's not your responsibility to make sure that the infrastructure is safe. Again, sanitary manhole, that's one log jam away from being knocked open and putting sewage in the stream. You can't really see it, but there was something like a 10-inch water main underneath here that was just about to be exposed. I'm sure they were having freezing problems and whatnot. There's huge costs associated with this. Some are municipal, some are private. You really can't see it at all. This is like a 30, 40 foot tall bank. There's a swing set right up there at the top of the bank. I wasn't there when this failed. I didn't document it beforehand, but again, from a dad's standpoint, it just breaks my heart thinking about some kid's swing set up there and how dangerous this is. So retaining wall going in, it's already started to fail a little bit here, but you can see the footings for all these other posts are just getting ready to go. I couldn't get a good picture of it because it was so dense in there, but the next lot up, people have a 6 foot tall privacy fence with a swimming pool right inside of that. They couldn't even see that the world was coming towards them, and there was a 35 foot drop off until it started to creep underneath the corner of the fence, and they could see down from in their swimming pool. They could see 35 feet down to the bottom. And so there again, this was all pre-detention development. Just touching on a little bit, I know Steve is going to talk a little bit more about detention basins and erosion controls and whatnot. One of the themes here of stormwater BMPs and their sediment reduction capacity, this is an outlet from an urban storm sewer coming straight into a detention basin. It's a giant pile of trash and sediment right there. And so we think about these externalities and the motivations and reasons for doing some of these stormwater practices, and people think about, oh, the maintenance, and we have to clean this sediment out, it's so difficult. We got to clean it out somewhere. They're going to have to maintain this sediment basin. Maybe you got to clean it out of the stream. And so, if nothing else, they give us a place to clean it out from. And pre-treatment. I'll come back to that, though, in a moment. A couple slides here on this. I've given this presentation a number of times. Cost benefits of green infrastructure versus gray, and we go on, and this is a study actually done by other people, not me. They're a lot smarter than I am. They looked at a whole lot of projects and basically found that if you really want to install green infrastructure as a part of your overall project, that costs are not necessarily more. We get that a lot. Oh, it's too expensive, we can't afford it on this project. They don't have to be. We've certainly seen it on some of our own projects. Other people apparently have seen it on nearly 479 projects. They're numerical views, not mine. This was a project of ours specifically. In this one we saw 10% savings, but at the end of the day, at the end of this presentation, I always have somebody that says, but what about the maintenance? You got to maintain these things. You're not including that cost because this is the capital cost, right? The capital cost savings. Let's say it breaks even. Let's say it costs a little bit more. The long-term big picture thing is that we're protecting all this stuff, right? We're protecting the kids. You can't put a cost on that. I know it's kind of a cheap shot. Won't somebody think of the children? But really, at the end of the day, that's kind of what it comes down to. If it's a break even or a little bit of cost savings, or maybe it just costs a little bit more, there are hidden costs associated that we are preventing, and that's the whole motivation and the reason that we do these things. Stream restoration itself, we do a fair amount of that. About the least expensive I've seen for things that you're even going to quantify. I mean, obviously, just pulling out some weeds and laying a bank back here and there doesn't cost too much, but I've seen a number of projects in about the $75 a foot range. If the owner does the work themselves with equipment they already own, and all they have to buy is some plants and maybe some erosion control fabric or something like that. More typically in our world, we see 150 to 500 bucks a foot. And that's, that's the design and the construction and public bidding and all that. And, it doesn't seem too terrible, but that one with the 5-6 foot head cut at the end of the undersized double box culvert, we had to fix it for 700 feet down. So you can do the math. We're pushing up on $500,000 just for that one fix, just in that one setting. And I say Band-Aid scale because a whole lot of these really, honestly, they are. We're fixing the visible part of the problem. We're fixing it where we possibly can, and we're doing what we can to solidify and stabilize it. We're not restoring the whole reach. We're not restoring miles and miles. We're not trying to put it back to some perfect ecological standpoint. But still, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Several of these are millions and millions of dollars. Not to mention infrastructure repair costs, downtime for the infrastructure, inconvenience for the private citizens, tree loss. That's one of the things that we fight a lot with these when we're trying to get easements and whatnot. We're trying to fix a stream in somebody's backyard. We unfortunately can't get in there and fix the stream without losing some of the trees, and that breaks people's hearts. And that's, that's how you have to do it sometimes. I'm a tree hugger as much as anybody else, and I do everything I can to protect them, but you just have to sometimes. And those are things you can't necessarily put a price tag on. How do I get my 200-year-old oak tree back? So, sometimes they're simple, like I said, sometimes they're really extensive. And yeah, this is what it takes to deal with unchecked development, undetained stormwater. Okay, you get it. Okay, so back to my presentation to the third graders. What do? Yay, we engineer a solution, we fix stuff, and we do things to prevent all these terrible things that we're looking at. And we say engineer a solution because I was talking to third graders and I was trying to tell them what an engineer does. Obviously, it doesn't require an engineer. All y'all come from all kinds of different walks of life, and yeah, you get it. So again, we'll spend a lot more time talking about these today. It's going to be great. We've got a bunch of great speakers, and these are the boots on the ground solutions, the low-hanging fruit that we're kind of on the forefront of getting implemented as much as we possibly can. And it's a learning process, right? We're all kind of developing this as we go. And so just have to give a little bit of a shout out as well. I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in addition to post-construction stormwater practices, bioretention cells, bioswales, whatnot, construction site erosion control and runoff is a huge factor. You ask a lot of lay people, what's the biggest water quality impediment in Iowa? And people say, oh, nitrate or this, that. It's sediment. It's always sediment. It obscures all the aggregate on the bottoms of streams, blinds all the habitat from the fish and the invertebrates and whatnot. Some of it comes from agriculture and whatnot. A whole lot of it comes from construction sites. This has been researched and documented, and these are the temporary things. This isn't the we designed this and we built it. This is the stuff that's temporary and in flux, and a lot of people don't give it a whole lot of thought. And we get it from contractors every day that, oh, well, we're going to be driving over that again, so we're not going to bother putting in the silt fence and whatnot. It's hugely important. You can't get this back. You can't go back in the stream and get the sediment and put it back. You can't get your topsoil back. And so we're trying as hard as we can to get more focus on this, that it's not just some temporary influx thing. It's really important. So we put in some bioretention cells. I've designed a whole bunch of these, not actually these. These were designed by my company, but not me. That was just a pretty picture on the internet. Apologize to whoever, but I personally have designed a whole bunch of them. We have iterated a bunch of times, and we're getting better and better at this. I'm not saying we're perfect. We've certainly got some things to figure out. This is the kind of the standard, right? I'm sure y'all have seen some version of this over time. It's a bioretention cell. Here's the various layers. But we've been building them like this for a while, and they're great. They're working in the right direction, absolutely. But we're learning from them as they're installed. There's some things missing in this. Some simple, some not so. I know better than to call on anybody, but if anybody wants to shout out anything that they see this could use, feel free. But it's early in the morning and it's a conference and I never want to raise my hand. One thing that we're definitely learning is that we need pre-treatment on all these practices, desperately. They are great and they're filtering stuff, but there's a lot of trash that ends up in them. There's a lot of sediment that ends up in them, and somebody inherits these from the city. They have to clean it. How do you do that? There's also a mulch issue. We heard about this a little bit yesterday at Kara's wonderful green infrastructure bus tour. There was some problems with mulch brought up. It tends to float, especially when it's new. It gets better as the stuff gets older and it ages and gets more waterlogged. Does anybody know? Can you tell what this is? I know it's an awkward picture. It is not Cousin It and R2D2 had a baby. That's actually your outlet structure. I've seen this many, many times, that the mulch floats and then it sticks to the outlet structure, and we've even seen instances where the whole darn thing floods out where it's supposed to be because the dang water can't get out. Maybe there's a building close by and the building got flooded, or it just, it was embarrassing one way or another. So we started adding mulch control netting to try and hold it down. Believe it or not, this one actually had that. And so some people use rock mulch. There's a few different approaches on it. This is one of those things, I'm not saying I've got it figured out. Y'all are smart. If you get it figured out, let me know. Maybe one of the other presentations later in the day, maybe they'll figure it out. It's definitely an issue. It's not perfect. We get a lot of crap from contractors and property owners and whatnot saying, your bioretention cell doesn't work because the thing plugs on the thing and it floods my... Right, we get it. It's not perfect, but we're working in the right direction, right? 4 bays. 4 bays are definitely very important. They give you a place to clean out the sediment and the trash. We've done a number of different iterations of them. We're getting better and better, but there's still issues. We call it the weep hole problem. You want the 4 bay to catch the sediment, and then you want it to drain down after the storm so it doesn't become a mosquito breeder, right? Well, how do you have it drain and also pool up to catch sediment? Both. We've put little holes. These cells here had little holes in the bottom, but over time you get water that goes through there and wells up underneath and it short circuits. These we used landscaping stone. They had little cracks between them. Those could weep out. That worked pretty well. It definitely catches a lot of stuff. That's the point, right? But the public works guy that has to scoop this out with the sediment and the cigarette butts in with the rocks, we told him, well, just, you just shovel it out, you hose things off, or you throw a gate down and you vac truck it right through that. It's like, have you ever tried to shovel out rocks with a bunch of sediment around it? College boy. And so I tried it one time. It sucks. Is it perfect? No. Is it better than nothing? Absolutely. So we're working on it. again, if anybody has any great ideas, we could use them. We're moving in the right direction. So that's good, right? You build a bioretention cell and the world's better, right? That's just sad. This is not one of mine. Somebody worked really hard to design that. They even got really nice limestone, weird and whatnot. I don't know what happened, if all the plants died and they started throwing building materials in there or what. I don't know. But it got me thinking that this is what happens sometimes, right? And so there's something missing, something that has to be done. Maybe it's understanding, maybe it's the design, I don't know. But it got me thinking about it. Maybe we're just pitching this wrong. We've been telling, I don't know about y'all, but I have been telling cities and property owners for a long time, install bioretention cells, you're making the world better, you're filtering the water, it's gonna be great. But for a long time, I think we kind of left out that the whole point of these things is to capture trash, to capture sediment. It has to be cleaned out. And I know some other folks are gonna talk about maintenance today, and I'm trying to steal your thunder, but we should have, from the beginning, put a lot more emphasis on that. That is the point of these things. It's to clean the water. The stuff you clean out of the water, you got to deal with that. You wouldn't imagine a trash can that you'd leave on the street for people to put trash in, so if your city isn't covered with trash, you wouldn't imagine just leaving it and not cleaning it out. Well, I mean, that one, I guess. But nonetheless, somebody's got to clean it out, right? So that's an important part of this. It's like really important. Otherwise, it kind of ends up like this. That's actually in St. Louis, so don't worry, it's in none of your communities. But, as I looked at it, that stuff's been there for a while. And so it was a great idea. Somebody's trying to do the right thing. The follow through needs to be there. Okay, you get it. All right, so to wrap it all up, in short, we talk a lot about pre-treatment for post-construction BMPs and forebays and whatnot, but in a way, all these various stages are pre-treatment for a lot of things. The big takeaway that a lot of these third graders got when I give this presentation is like, don't litter, right? That's the best pre-treatment. Just don't throw the crap on the ground. That's easy. Stormwater BMPs are they're pre-treatment in themselves. Maybe they have built-in pre-treatment. Maybe they're pre-treatment for the detention basin, so you don't have to clean out the detention basin nearly so often. The detention basin is the pre-treatment for the streams, right? So it buffers the volume and it takes a lot of the trash out so that somebody doesn't have to get down there in the stream. So that we don't have to deal with repairing the infrastructure and spending $500,000 on putting 700 feet of stream back so it doesn't tear out our road and our water mains. The streams themselves, are in a way water quality and quantity buffers for their receiving water bodies, the oceans and the lakes and whatnot. And of course, it all comes back to the we're all downstream of somebody philosophy. So with that, I hope I didn't depress you too much. Hope the motivation is there, but I would be happy to take any questions that you've got. And
or save them and we'll do a little panel discussion at our presenter. So
there you go.